This is Chapter 5 of our Dynamic Caro-Kann course for chess goals. We will be looking at the classical Caro-Kann, and we're playing the Tartakower variation with knight f6. And in this chapter, we will be looking at the most common move after knight f6, which is knight takes f6. This knight takes f6 is played about half the time here, and the other moves are played about the other 50% of the time. And one thing that we're looking to do with this chess goals course, we have about 10 chapters. Each chapter covers about 10% of what you'll see in your games after the Caro-Kann, so after e4, c6. And within each of those chapters, so each chapter is 10%, we have 10 variations usually. So each variation is about 1%. So we're trying to give you the most practical lines to learn. In this variation, instead of knight f6, you could play bishop to f5 or knight to d7. Those are the most popular moves. Do you have your Grandmaster database open, Jesse, to compare the numbers?
I do, yeah. So bishop f5 is played about 15,000 times, knight d7 about 7,000 times, and knight f6 about 4,000 times. So much less, probably. So four versus, so it's about 20% of the time we're seeing knight f6.
Yeah, so it's a bit less common than bishop f5 and knight d7 at the higher levels. Surprisingly, at the club level, it's more popular than knight d7. But I can tell you back when I used to play the Caro as a main weapon consistently, I was never seeing knight f6. Like knight d7, bishop f5 were much more common. And the reason I'm recommending knight f6 though is because in the bishop f5 and knight d7 lines, there's a lot of theory to memorize. And some of the theory is like 16, 18 moves deep. Some of the theory involves very tactical variations where black can get checkmated super early or drop material or have positionally lost game. So what I like about this knight f6 variation, it's more solid, and it also gives us a very strategic plans to play for and positions that we'll become more comfortable with over time, where we just keep seeing the same structure over and over again.
Yep, for sure. And so we're going to start with knight f6. And like Matt said, we're going to cover knight takes f6 check. I have the master's database open here, and this move is played almost always. So surprising discrepancy there between the top players and players at the club level. So so they take the knight 3,600 times and they play everything else about 200 times.
Wow.
So very heavily favored in to take the knight. I think maybe at the club level, why it's not played so often is it's such a weird move that you're just going to voluntarily double your pawns. It's like, oh, they must know something here. I'm not going to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
So, and they'd be right against us.
Right.
All
Well, I
right,
think
so
we'll have fun next chapter. That means if
yeah,
the
yeah,
GMs aren't retreating the knight.
we're going to be over prepped against the GMs.
Yeah. Okay, so here, this is interesting choice. E takes f6 is a much stronger move, according to the computers. But G takes f6 is a very interesting move, and it's really aggressive. G takes f6 opens up this G file for the rook right away, and you can get a nice attack going. We might do a bonus chapter on that, but I'm not making any promises right now. The main recommendation is E takes f6. Um, Go
Yeah,
ahead.
remember we were looking at this a while ago, and we saw both the G takes and E takes were about 50-50 in the master's database. But I remember you saying something that in recent times, E takes has become much more popular, and it seems to be much more theoretically sound. Am I airballing on that, or does that seem familiar?
No, that's exactly right. So players like Aronian have played it, Magnus has played it. And I think the reason why you see a lot more E takes f6 now is because the computers are getting so strong. And if you put this into Stockfish, E takes f6 is very close to equal. G takes f6, it's much closer to being white up one pawn than it is to equal. So G takes f, you don't want to play it at the highest levels. It's a fun line, but it's not as sound. E takes f, perfectly playable at all levels. So that's why it's a more common move in recent times.
Yep. So here there are a bunch of different things that white can throw at us. So I think we're going to start with knight f3. This is kind of the main line of this chapter.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with very normal kind of development and kind of branch out away from there. So bishop d6 is what we're going to play a lot of the time here, and it's a nice active square for the bishop.
Right. And one thing I looked for in this chapter that we do in other chapters as well, I looked for a very consistent plan that we can do almost no matter what white plays. So the move order we're going to tend to see here is bishop to d6, castle. The h8 rook will come over to e8. And then we have this knight maneuver, knight d7, knight f8. So it looks very slow. All of our pieces are back on the 6th through 8th ranks. But we're going to consistently do this plan, and we're super solid. So it makes it easy for us. Always maneuver the same kind of plans, and then after that, we'll kind of look at what white does and go from there. So we're going to see this bishop d6 almost always on move 6 in this chapter.
Yep, and don't worry, we will get into these double F pawns at some point, but right now, just got to trust us that it gives us a lot of really fun ideas coming up in the future. So let's start with getting our pieces developed and follow through with our standard plan.
Yep, so after bishop d3, we see castle. And this threatens a quick rook e8 check. So it makes sense for white to castle here. Rook e8. And again, we're going to see knight to d7, heading to f8, heading to g6, and then we will probably play the bishop out to e6 and the queen behind the bishops. So everything is going to be in these back 3 ranks, but we have this very kind of coiled up position ready to spring forward for an attack.
Yeah, for sure. And very, very solid position. Really hard to get attacked with such a solid setup. So benefit there versus the drawbacks of playing more of a slow, solid setup.
Yeah, and one thing I should definitely mention for this chapter, we are tending to play prophylactic in this chapter. So we are looking for the squares that the white pieces want to go to, and we're trying to limit the scope of those pieces. So look at this knight on f3. Defended, defended. There's a pawn here. Look at this bishop on d3. Can't go here, can't go here, can't go here. Look at the c1 bishop. Cannot go here, cannot go here, cannot go here. e3 puts it between 2 pawns. d2 is very passive. So that's something that's going to be a theme in this whole chapter. Really focus on controlling where your opponent's pieces can go. It's a very slow chapter. Some of our chapters we get a bit more pressure on the white position. This one's quite a bit slower, but it's also very solid. So here the most common move for white is played probably a little less than half the time. h3, which is actually trying to do the same thing to us. They don't want our bishop to come out to g4 real easily, where maybe it would come back and eventually trade for d3. So they're playing h3, trying to limit us. So now I think we should go forward with the standard plan. What do you think, Jesse?
Yep, so we're going to start with our knight maneuver. Right now, there's not a great place for this light square bishop. Like you said, we can't go here or here. E6 is a pretty good square for a bishop, but that square is going to be there forever. So start with our knight maneuver. We're going to play knight d7, and we're going to see this come up in the next few moves too.
Yeah, so the most common line, c3, knight to f8, bishop to e3, because there's no great squares for that bishop, bishop to e6, queen c2. Another nice thing about the knight on f8 you'll see is that it guards this pawn on h7. So like right now we have this battery for white, queen and bishop hitting h7. It's already defended. This is a really fun line. So when you see the pawn on h3, and Jesse highlighted it earlier, this is going to become a target now. Queen to d7, and we're actually threatening bishop takes h3. If it's our move right here, bishop takes h3, I think is already winning.
I want to check to see if it works. So bishop takes h3. Yep, so it looks like that's a really strong move. It's not immediately checkmate or anything, but it looks like the best move, according to Stockfish, is just to play a rook out and not take back.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. So
yeah.
I'm looking at the club level stats in the book. After rook f to e1, the most popular move, black wins 66% of the time. All the
Oh
other
wow.
moves are scoring between 60 and 90% win rate for black. So not score rate, win rate. So
Wow.
white has to be very careful here. Rook f to e1 is the most popular move. And here I looked at two lines. The recommended line is actually knight to g6. But you can sack on h3 if you are okay with a perpetual or if you don't think your opponent will find the best defense. So let's look at that line. Bishop takes, queen takes. There's one key move for white here. That's an only move. Yeah, you need to guard f3 and can save the black or the white king. It's queen d1. It's the only move.
Yep. So we're defending the knight, and we can't quite hit him with a checkmate or anything. So here it looks like I mean, obviously White's king is wide open. I
Yeah,
wonder what the engine says. Now, what engine just gives triple zeros? So
right.
sad.
We have to repeat. So the issue here is after queen d1, the reason queen d1 is so strong, bishop to f1 is coming. Kicks our queen out and white's defended.
Yeah, I
So
see that.
so even though we're showing this bishop takes h3 line with best play, it's a draw. Um, but if white doesn't play rook f to e1, if white plays an inferior move, then bishop takes h3 definitely works.
If you're playing someone like 600 points higher rated than you, just go for that and take the draw, baby.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly
I
right.
also I also see in this line potentially with Stockfish's help, we could push the G pawn and really go for something, but I'm not sure it's going to amount to anything. Just a move that Stockfish found. So if you want to explore that, we'll leave that as an exercise for the viewer.
Oh, that's an interesting attack. I kind of like those pawn pushes in these lines where we have the doubled f pawns.
I'm feeling another bonus chapter someday.
Yeah, a bonus on top of the bonus chapter.
Yeah.
So we're recommending here knight to g6. And the reason I like knight g6 instead of just going for the draw is because I already feel the black position is better. So why immediately go for that line, hoping that white doesn't find the best defense? This is a really strong position for us.
Yep, and it's important to note that if they take this knight, we want to take back with the H pawn, and we just have this huge pawn mass that is just going to completely roll over on the king side. So it looks weird having like doubled pawns, but it's just like this untouchable pawn of or storm of pawns. So that'd be a fun position to play sometime.
Yeah, a cube of pawns, right?
Yeah,
So bishop
pawn
f,
cube.
yeah, bishop f1 is the most popular move. Uh, Here we're recommending bishop to d5. We want to take on f3 right away, doubling the pawns. And this is kind of a similar theme that we have in other chapters. We try to put tough questions to the opponent. So they just put that bishop back. Yeah, that's exactly right. And winning the h3 pawn. So now they have to figure out what to do. The most common move is knight to d2. And here we get to play a really fun move. We get to use our doubled f pawn and start shoveling up the board. f5, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of the main idea that you want behind these double F pawns is just use these to really put pressure on white and just kind of like have a bone down their throat. They're always thinking about uh, this king side attack, and you can see this pawn is very well supported. We have the bishop and the knight. If we want to go further someday, the bishop is backing it up even on the f3 square. So we're starting to see why these double F pawns can be a big advantage here.
Yeah, I also like to compare the minor pieces. So maybe I'm a bit biased since I am creating this repertoire for black, but look at the minor pieces for white. I would argue all three of those pieces are pretty passive right now. Look at our
Yeah,
three minor pieces, all very active. We have this active F pawn. That's exactly right.
yeah, these bishops just a ton of scope. The queen pointing at the king too, and so yeah, I think our pieces are undoubtedly a lot better.
Yeah, so I looked at the most common move for white, knight c4. Here we can drop this bishop back, still pointing at h2. And then, yeah, the plan is to push the f pawn. We can push the b pawn, kick that knight right back. We still have all the scope that we had a couple moves ago. What's the Stockfish evaluation here, Jesse? I'm curious.
Um, give it a sec. It says negative 1.3.
I'll
Yeah,
take it. Yeah.
it says best move is just to give up a pawn. Just play the knight in and give up a pawn.
That's pretty amazing. Okay.
Yeah, well, take that pawn every day.
Yeah, I agree.